everybody, it's Mrs. Keen here. I'm going to take you through the Biosphere unit higher. Within this unit, we're going to be studying 3 different types of soil: hard soil, brown earth and clay. Now, when we do this, things that you need are going to be some different colour pens, if you have it, maybe some highlighters, and your jotter or some paper. There will be tasks on certain slides as we go through, which you will complete. Okay, let's get started. Okay folks, I've just done the full PowerPoint with all of the audio on it, so I do apologise if there are any errors in it, as I've tried my best to be really clear. If you need to clarify anything though, Miss Schooler is available, and I just hope everybody is really safe and is all okay, and I'll see you soon. Okay, so in your jotter, we're going to put the title, what is soil? And while we do this, you're going to have a think about what makes up soil. Now, it's not just dirt, it's not the blood, it's actually super important for civilization. We use it to grow crops, to feed our population, so it's actually a wee bit more than just mud. So what do you think is actually in soil? Okay, so take a wee bit of time. Once you've completed that and you've made a wee list of different things, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so you can see from the diagram in front of you, the pie chart, that actually soil is made up of 4 things. So if we start with the organic matter, that is really important because that's going to give your soil the nutrients that it needs. So when you're talking about the nutrient cycle, the leaves fall in autumn, they will decompose and return a lot of the goodness back to the soil. That will then go back up through the roots of the tree and back into the soil, ready for spring for the next season. Mineral, you can see it makes up a huge percentage of it, 45%. That is going to come from the bedrock, the soil, the bedrock underneath the soil. So what it's actually lying on. So is it going to be harder rock like granite? Is it sedimentary rocks like sandstone? What is it that's going to give the soil a little bit more of its texture and colour? Next 2 things are air and water. Now these can vary, and it varies because of, and linking back to that, mineral particles. So how much space is there between the minerals and how much water and air is going to get in there. Alright, so soil, as you can see, is more than just mud. Okay, next section is how is soil formed. So that should be the next subtitle in your jotter, and then we'll move on to slide 5. Okay, so underneath your subtitle of how is soil formed, right across the top, 10 rubber ducks can overtake penguins. Now this is a little saying that's going to help you remember the things that help the soil to form. Once you've done that, then down the side of your page, I want you to write TRDCOP, leaving spaces in between, because you're going to write a little summary of the note beside each of the letters. Also folks, for this, when you're doing this, get yourself another coloured pen or a highlighter, because I'm going to ask you, while you're summarising notes as we go through this, to highlight or underline any important words and terminology that you're going to need later in the Biosphere unit. Okay, so the first letter we've written down is T, and that represents time. So at the top it says there, time is required for soil to develop. Now, when you think about it, that's going to make sense, because we need our weather and our elements to break down rocks, to break down organic matter to help soil form. The picture at the bottom represents Surtsey. Now, Surtsey is in Iceland. Surtsey was an underwater volcano that erupted in 1963, broke the surface of the ocean and formed a new piece of land. 53 years on, in the picture on the right, you can see that we've now got plants colonising the surface of Surtsey. So for plants to be able to colonise, there must be some nutrients there and some soil formed. So that's taken 53 years for some sort of plant life to be there. Alright, so time is the first one. So time is a requirement for soil to form. Okay folks, the next letter is R and that stands for relief. Now, you should know from geography, but if you don't, relief is the height and shape of the land. When this links to soil, it means, very briefly for your notes, that the higher the piece of land or the steeper the slope, generally the thinner the soil. So on flatter areas and areas that are closer to the sea, it tends to be the soil is very much deeper. And that's it, very simply. So when you're taking notes, that's all I want you to say. Altitude can influence soil, but areas that are steeper and higher up tend to have thinner soils than areas that are flatter and closer to the sea. Okay, next letter is D for drainage. Now, drainage is linked to water, and there are 3 keywords that I need you to write down in your notes. Leaching, aeroviation, and alluviation, and you can see them underlined on the screen. Now, leaching is basically when water moves through the soil and it will take some sort of goodness out of the soil. And at this, we're talking about minerals, clay, humus from the soil, and it will move it down through the soil. So from the top layers of the soil to the bottom layers of the soil. This is represented by the words of alluviation and alluviation. So alluviation with an E on the left is the movement of minerals out of the top layers of the soil. So it's E for exit. The alluviation with the I on the right hand side is the movement of minerals into lower areas of the soil. So I for in. Okay, so it's a really good way of remembering alluviation and alluviation, and they sound really similar, I know. Okay, so make sure you've got those 3 keywords to do with drainage, and remember, drainage is linked to the movement of water. Okay, next letter is C for climate. Climate, we know, is to do with the weather that is the most common in a part of the world. Okay, so if we were talking about the rainforest, it would be hot and wet. If we were talking about the deserts, whether we're talking about the tundra or the hot deserts, you're talking about cold and dry or hot and dry. Okay, so when we're thinking about this, we're talking about temperature and precipitation. And remember, precipitation is rainfall in its forms of rain, snow, sleet, and hail. Very simply, the warmer the areas, you tend to have microorganisms like worms and bacteria. And when you're talking about soil, you need those things to break down organic matter, so like leaves and minerals. So higher temperatures will mean that you do have earthworms and bacteria. If you're talking about precipitation, you're talking about rainfall. Now, this is again back to one of those key terms that I've asked you to remember, which is leaching. So if you look at the bottom sentence, if rainfall exceeds evaporation, then leaching may take place. So basically, if you have lots of rainfall, you're going to have leaching within the soil. Okay, so climate is broken down into temperature and precipitation. Very important to remember those 2 distinct parts of climate. You'll need this later on when we do the case studies. Okay, next one is O for organic matter. Now, this we're talking about in terms of vegetation. So we've got on the screen 4 pictures. We've got coniferous trees, deciduous trees, reeds and juncus, and mosses and lichens. All of these are going to link to particular types of soil, the podzol, the clay, and the brown earth. Really important to know the difference between coniferous trees and deciduous trees to begin with. Have a wee think, looking at the pictures, what you think the most common types of trees are. Have a look out your window, see what you can see. Does it have leaves on it at the moment? If it does, then it's most likely a coniferous tree, like a Christmas tree. And if it doesn't have any leaves on it, then it's going to be a deciduous tree which sheds its leaves in the autumn. Once you've had a wee think about that, move on to the next slide. Once you know the difference between your coniferous and deciduous trees, it really makes knowing how that influences soil so much easier. So on the left-hand side, we can see the coniferous trees, like your Christmas trees, that have the pine needles and waxy. Now, if anybody had a real Christmas tree over Christmas, you'll know that when you brought your Christmas tree in, it would have started to drop needles when it started to get a wee bit dehydrated. They are really difficult to break down outside in the real world, un-Christmassy world. Okay, so coniferous trees will drop needles. They are waxy and difficult to break down. Now that leads to the very top layer of soil being acidic. And now in the world of biosphere, we call acidic top layers of soil more humus. On the right hand side, we can see deciduous trees. They do shed their leaves in autumn. They have big, broad leaves. They can be really easily broken down by any organisms. They lead to less acidic top layers of soil, and we call that mull humus. You must remember more humus and mull humus. Two very important keywords for you later on. Okay, we're still on letter O for this, and this links to organisms. Now, really important for you to know the difference between microorganisms and earthworms. So microorganisms, we're very simply just talking about bacteria, and then your worms are going to then help to break down the soil by churning the soil up as they move through it. They aerate it, they let air in. You need to know what these are, bacteria and worms, microorganisms, because it links to, very importantly, to the three types of soil. So make sure that you have an understanding and awareness of these things. Okay, and last letter now is P, and that stands for parent material. This one looks a wee bit confusing and a lot of information on the screen, but let's just break that down. So if you're looking at the first piece of information there, the rate of weathering, that is basically how quickly is rock broken down. If you've got a hard rock like granite, that is going to break down really slowly than if you've got something like sandstone. So depending on which parent material that your soil is sitting on top of, that's going to give and influence the characteristics of the soil. Chemical composition and colour are important ones for you to be aware of for later on, and it's basically, is it acidic or less acidic, and what colour is it going to be. So parent material has an influence over colour and acidity. The last one is texture, and you can see up at the top we've included like clay particles are very small, then it's silt, then it's sand. So if you've got something like a sandstone, your texture of your soil is going to be much more loose than something that was maybe influenced by a clay. So if it's oversitting a clay, that's going to affect other things like drainage. So just to be aware of these things, because it influences a lot of what we're going to talk about later. Okay folks, now we've got through all of that, we're just going to go into the next section, and the last section for this introduction to Biosphere, and that is where our three case study soils are located. Podzol, brown earth and clay. One slide is going to be on where they are located in terms of latitude, so where it is across the globe in bands. And then the last section is going to be on where you find these soils in terms of altitude, so where they are up a slope. Okay everybody, so next section of our daughter, put location of case study soils as your title, and then your subtitle, zonal soils are found at different latitudes, so just put that. Once you've done that, on the top right of the screen, you can see it says describe where each soil is located. Try and give country examples. So the clay is in green, the podzol is in blue, and the brown earth is in purple. Try and describe where you find these across the globe. Okay, so hopefully you've done the task and not jumped on sneakily to the second little audio bite, and we can see that Gley is located in the northernmost parts of the globe, for example in the tundra, northern Siberia, Greenland and northern Canada. Podzols are located in northern parts of the globe, in places like Canada again, but also in Scandinavia. Okay, so you could say, for example, in Finland or Sweden and Russia. Brown Earth is located closest to the equator, and it's in countries, for example, like the UK and Germany. Okay folks, the next subtitle is Zonal soils are found at different altitudes. Try the wee task, describe where each soil is located on the slope. Remember, you are describing location in terms of altitude, and there is a wee bit of writing on the diagram to help you with this. Okay, so hopefully what we've got is that podzols are located at the highest altitude in the upper slopes, where we often find coniferous trees and it has a wet climate. Brown earth is found in the middle of the slope, where we've got deciduous trees and a milder climate, and Gley is at the bottom of the slope, tends to be where the area is waterlogged. Hopefully you've appreciated the beautiful wee diagram of budding jographers, some beautiful sheep and majestic river, and some deciduous and coniferous trees there as well. Okay folks, just a wee summary of what we've done so far. We first looked at the composition of soil. It's not just dirt or mud, it's actually the foundation of civilization. So it's made up of organic matter, minerals, air and water. Next we moved on to look at how soil is formed. So our TRDCOP, so hopefully we know what these stand for now. And the last thing, the location of the 3 types of soil. The next thing that we're going to move on to is how a podzol is formed.